Let's turn to exploring the Shema discussions on the issues of Trinity and pick up our study where we left off 2 weeks ago. We are talking and working our way through this chart that is actually put together. If I scroll down, you'll see it's a chart that Karn put together on the Holy Spirit. Actually, the chart originally has Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I just shaved off the two columns that have Father and Son, since this section is really about the Holy Spirit. Who or what is the Holy Spirit? And we're really interacting with the passages. We talked about that the Holy Spirit is called God in the book of Acts. We talked about that the Holy Spirit is identified as the Creator in the book of Job. And we also started talking about how the Holy Spirit is one who raised Yeshua from the dead in Romans chapter 8. I want to talk about quickly how the Holy Spirit indwells us in John, about how the Holy Spirit is everywhere in the book of Psalms, and that the Holy Spirit is all-knowing, right? He's omniscient in the book of 1 Corinthians. And I might even also get to the fact that the Holy Spirit sanctifies us as believers in the book of 1 Peter. And then, so those four, right? Indwells, everywhere, all-knowing, and sanctifies. And then what I want to do is if I have time, I want to circle back around again to Romans chapter 8 and basically exegete much of that passage, because it's a heavy spirit passage utilized by Paul. In fact, I think by count, if I remember, it's one of the chapters in Paul's writings where he uses the word spirit, pneuma in the Greek, or pneuma, however, if you want to pronounce the P or not. He uses this word spirit more often than any other letter or chapter in his writings. So let's first turn, because the other topics aren't that difficult to interact with. So let's first talk about John 14:17, where the Spirit indwells us. Let's turn there first. This is the famous passage where Yeshua promises to the disciples that he's going to send the Holy Spirit. Let's read it. John 14:16, and I will ask the Father, this is where we're going to start, I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper to be with you forever. And then in verse 17, even the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive because it neither sees him nor knows him. You know him, for he dwells with you and will be in you. This is one of these triadic discussions where, if you are careful to watch the language that's utilized in the New Testament, when it talks about the Spirit of God, or the Holy Spirit, you'll not only notice that the language switches back and forth between who dwells in you. It's God dwelling in you. It's the Spirit of Christ who dwells in you, or is sent into you, like as in Galatians 4, God sends the Spirit of his Son into you, crying, Abba, Father. Or it's the Holy Spirit dwelling in you, so that the question is asked, who is indwelling us? Is it God? Is it the Spirit of God? Is it the Spirit of Messiah? Or is it the Holy Spirit? The answer is yes. That's what you're going to find when you read through the New Testament. But something else peculiar that you're going to find is that the Holy Spirit is sent by the Father, but also in this passage, it's the Son who asks the Father to send the Holy Spirit. And so the Holy Spirit is commissioned by the Father, but sent by the Son, or something to that effect. There's this whole filioque debate in Catholicism versus Orthodoxy over, does the Holy Spirit proceed from the Father? Does he proceed from the Son? Does he proceed from the Father and the Son? Is it the Father versus the Son? This whole idea of procession. And, because Yeshua uses language where he talks about, I'm going to ask the Father to send the Holy Spirit, but then I'm going to send the Holy Spirit, and things like that, right? If you scroll down a little bit further, let me keep reading. Let me find it. The Helper, the Holy Spirit, in verse 26, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach all things and bring to you remembrance of all that I've said to you. But earlier in verse 16 and 17, I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper to be with you forever, even the Spirit of truth whom the world cannot receive because it's another season. There's language to suggest that Yeshua sinned. So the point, however, for our discussion tonight is not the filioque debate, procession of Father versus Son. I talked about that in earlier teaching. You can go back and watch those YouTube videos. The point tonight is simply that who is indwelling us? It is the Holy Spirit. And the way that we interact with Trinity in this passage is that there are passages, I don't have time to pull them up now, but there are passages that, again, indicate that it's God dwelling in us, other passages that it's the Spirit of Messiah who's in us, and we'll see this in Romans, by the way. And then there are other passages that talk about that it is the Holy Spirit. And is it the Holy Spirit of God? Is it the Holy Spirit of Messiah? Those are the questions that we begin to ask. Of course, this is the famous Paraclete passage. If we were to go over to the Greek, the Greek word right here, parakleton, is rooted in the word paraclete, which many pastors are fond of letting us know that this is the helper. That's the English translation of paraclete, is another helper, the paraclete. And so we know from this passage also that it's not just the Holy Spirit. He's not just an inactive force or a power or a gift that's given. And he's not simply or merely another way of saying the Spirit of God, like many Unitarians are fond of trying to convince me that the Holy Spirit is merely God's very own Spirit and there's no separate entity or person or being known as a Spirit. Aha, but if the Father is sending the Spirit into us and into our hearts, and the Spirit is going to intercede on our behalf, like we're going to read about in Romans 8 here in a moment, and things like that, this Spirit has his own will. The Spirit knows what is the mind of God, like we're reading Romans again, Romans chapter 8. Get a lot of mileage out of Romans chapter 8, like I said. Then the Spirit is obviously a separate Spirit, but yet is one in essence with God. So the Spirit is similar, and in many respects is the same, because he's very God, he's very deity, but at the same time, we recognize him and qualify him as a distinct person.